SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us now live from New York. Sherwin, good evening to you and welcome. An extraordinary moment in the United Nations Security Council this afternoon. With that decision, it sent shockwaves around the world with a divided opinion on how it went down. Take us into the room.
I would say extraordinary, Iman, but certainly not unexpected. If you look at history, history informs us that the United States, when it comes to the UN Security Council, tends to lean in Israel's favor. It has the ear of the Israeli state and certainly acts in what they view as their national interests. Let me tell you what this Brazilian drafted resolution said. It firmly condemned all violence and hostilities against civilians and all acts of terrorism. It unequivocally rejected and condemned the heinous terrorist attack and mentions Hamas as the perpetrator. It calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, urges all parties to fully comply with their international law obligations, including the protection of civilians. It calls for the rescission of the order for civilians and UN staff to evacuate all areas in Gaza's north. And it calls for humanitarian pauses, not a humanitarian ceasefire, but humanitarian pauses to allow full, rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. The United States vetoed this resolution. Sorry, my telephone connection has just dropped, but I think it's back now. My apologies, Iman. The United States basically blocked this resolution because it said it didn't explicitly articulate Israel's right to self-defense, and it wanted the Security Council to defer to U.S. diplomatic efforts that are continuing on the ground. As you might have seen, U.S. President Joe Biden announcing in remarks to the press a short time ago in Israel that the United States had negotiated with Israel's war cabinet for the beginning of humanitarian access into Gaza via the Rafah border crossing in Egypt. We don't have all the details in relation to that agreement, but the United States certainly seems to want to defer to its own diplomatic efforts rather than work through the multilateral fora that the UN Security Council provides for.
Let's just break down, before we go a little bit more into some detail around that agreement, what it means and where the US stands in terms of overnight activity, quite starkly the bombing of that hospital. 15 members on the United Nations Security Council, 12 members vote in favor, 2 abstain, with the US vetoing. And it is thrown up again, and as you said, extraordinary but not altogether unexpected. However, this time round, and given the mounting body count, a lot of discussion around calls for a reform of the United Nations Security Council and others questioning the coherence of the bloc.
Well, I mean, we had the same sort of discussions around Security Council inaction as it relates to the war in Ukraine, because Russia is the protagonist there and has its own self-interests at heart and will certainly use its veto to protect those self-interests. So, turn the corner and you now have the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and you see another P5 member here, the United States, deferring to its national interests, its bilateral relationship with Israel, the domestic politics. Remember that Israel is a big domestic political issue in the United States. It has the support, the unequivocal support of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So in a sense, the big picture here tells us that the United States president might be very much concerned about the upcoming election and how any decision he makes in relation to this conflict will play out to a domestic audience. Essentially, Iman, the argument goes that sometimes geopolitics is very domestic, and I think that's what you're seeing playing out here. So it does raise questions about the lack of reform of this UN Security Council. It's something we've been plugging away at for a very long time in relation to various conflicts around the world, not only Ukraine, not only in relation to the Middle East conflict. You can talk about China's role as it relates to what's happening in Myanmar. You can talk about Russia's relationship as it relates to various coup dynamics in West Africa. And so this process goes on, and this is why, almost 2 decades of intergovernmental negotiations have been grappling with the issue of United Nations Security Council reform. But unfortunately, we haven't even moved to text-based negotiations for that process to reach some sort of conclusion. We seem to go around in circles when we talk about UN reform, and it plays itself out in instances like this where we talk about UN Security Council credibility when the issue of reform is not getting the attention it requires.